Welcome to season 2 of the Mother of It All podcast. We have so much in store for you this season. For full goodness, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, or come on over to our Substack at motherofitall.substack.com, where you can see our podcast newsletter, engage with other listeners, and get bonus episodes in your inbox. Let's do this thing.
If we assume that children are people, then this actually raises quite a lot of questions around ethics and around power and around social justice and around who gets to be the person in charge.
I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is the Mother of It All, where we take on culture through the lens of motherhood and motherhood through the lens of culture.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. Yeah. 1 week of school, almost down.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes, that's for my children. I'm sorry. I hate that thing when you ask someone how they are and they answer on behalf of their children and you're like, you're a person too.
Oh, yeah. I think other parents know it and it's like, that's your life. That's,
right.
Yes. I am all at, so we are about to make the transition from Darla, our amazing nanny, as we've referred to her before as the sponsor of the show.
Darla, our sponsor, is leaving.
Darla's leaving. Yes. She's going to stay close, sad. But she's done.
We're open for more nannies.
We're done. No, we're done.
Oh, I just mean for the show. If we could have a nanny for the show.
Yeah.
Made us snacks and
It's kind of what Allie is, I guess. But so it's sort of bizarre because I've had 40 hours a week of childcare for a long time because we ramped up to that when I was full-time at Romper. And then when I got laid off, we sort of kept it because I had that momentum and she had that income and we had that sort of sensibility. And then
we should have given a trigger warning for that statement. I'm sorry. I've had 40 hours a week of, no, it's okay.
I know.
Content.
I feel embarrassed about it, but I'm trying to also just say it. It's just a fact.
It is a fact. We all,
Right. And that's going to end, and Nellie, we're doing that really minimal preschool because we didn't get into free preschool, so it's okay. But we're going to do this really
low educational philosophy. It's minimal preschool.
It's very minimal.
We only believed kids should have 2.5 hours of preschool a day for their development.
Pretty much. It's going to be 4. I mean, it was I signed her up, and it's 8:30 to 12:30, and in this very cute little house and this very sweet person, and a neighbor's kid goes there and she was raving about it. So it feels perfect. Nellie's really ready for social time and activities and, a little bit bored with me. And,
no.
Yeah. But it's going to be such a shocking change. So I'm going to be with her starting at
less,
12:30 and then all day Wednesday because there's no Wednesday. She's not going on Wednesdays. And it's just,
I love that. It's 4 hours a day. Also no Wednesdays. They just stick you.
Yeah. It's just it's gonna be, but I'm actually trying to I have a bunch of deadlines to meet. And so I think I still have this anxiety about that. But then when I get through that, I think I'm actually really looking forward to our Wednesdays. I think we're going to go do some stuff and I might sign her up for a little art class through the Portland parks.
We've talked about this, but the magic of one kid, when our moms were on the show, I think my mom who had 5 kids said that when we asked her what her self-care was when she was a younger mother, she said just being with one kid. And I do think there is something really lovely to it, especially as your kids get a little older and you're starting to be oh, you can do these things, but your skills and your interests sometimes get masked in the negotiation of our whole family being together. So you can just do full on Nelly time.
Right.
Yeah, go do your art class.
There hasn't been much of that, and so I think I am really excited for that. And Griffin got a lot of it during the pandemic. Yeah. I was with him so much. And it's not exactly guilt, but I had a longing for that time with her in that same way. So,
I neglect my second in terms of that. I spent a lot of time with my son. And then I think we both have sensitive older boys. Yes. And my sensitive older boy kind of just can't handle after school anymore. He likes it, but he just comes home and loses it. So he's not going this year. So now I have one kid I'm picking up, you know, in half and half kind of with my husband. And he's like pretty independent too. He's 8. He can like go pew 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 with like Legos in his room for like 90 minutes straight.
That's
without
amazing.
Food or water. Or, yeah. But you know, we're trying to do some other things, and I think it's fine. Like you said, I'm looking forward to it in some ways. Particularly because he's older, and it's like there are some new things we could do together. But then I'm like, oh, it's even more like QT that I have with him that I'm not having with my daughter. And every once in a while, as a second child, she deigns to challenge the status quo. That, like, you know, and she's like, "Can I maybe have some?" And I'm like, "Shut up, do it." You know,
but you're my easy one. You don't need. And it's like then you hear yourself and you're like, "This is terrible."
She's not, but she's demanding attention with screams a lot. So
this must be we have very similar children dynamics.
Is that the strategy?
Like, Nellie is loud. Yeah, Nellie is very, very loud, very physical. Griffin is more of a mental, sort of psychological.
But is that
experience.
their natural state? The younger loud girls, or are they doing that as a reaction to having these, like, you know, consuming older siblings? I don't know.
They had to be that way to get any kind of.
Right. I think
let's solve nature
if I remember
right
graduate
now.
school, I think that families have something called dynamics. I have to go back and look, but
if only we could erase those, then we would see our children in their natural state.
So just to go back to how are you? Yes, you proved with your description of how you were doing that how your kids are doing, of course, is related to how you are doing.
Yeah.
And I am in my own body. I'm good. Ooh. I've been going to a hip hop dance class. I'm feeling good. Yes. As a person, I think I'm good. Thank you. And you?
That's perfect. That's a perfect, Sarah. Like that makes me happy for you. That's a perfect thing for you to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Would it be shocking or just like, yeah, obviously, if I told you that sometimes we turn the lights off and the instruction is write your name with your pussy?
Wow. Oh, wow. I guess it's like
an Usher song. It is my happy place.
I love that.
I never ask.
I go to a class sometimes called Booty Love here in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
And there's certain thrusting moves and stuff. And she has this funny name she's like, your delicate business.
Your delicate business?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, in Oakland, we just say pussy.
Right. That's Portland versus Oakland.
It's like it's on billboards in Oakland. You can't walk a block without someone going pussy. Delicate business. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It always feels a little special, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Your delicate business is special, Miranda. How is your delicate business?
Oh,
not
I'd
related to
rather
your
not
kids
say.
and what they did to
Well, C-sections. So
yeah. Oh, you're flexing that your delicate business is a little more tight than mine.
I really don't know. All I know is my delicate business.
Right. You don't have a before and after of what it would have been like. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
For all I know, it's terrible.
The reports on mine are that it's still, after pushing out 2 kids, it is operating at full capacity.
Oh
no,
my
that's
gosh.
not what I ment to say.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we have to bring on our guest so that we stop talking about our delicate business. We're gonna get that not safe for work rating on this episode.
Depends on your job. If you're a booty love instructor, you can expense this.
Shout out to Heather, I gotta say, because she's this is her own thing. She sort of invented it, and she recently had a health
she
scare.
Branded it. People have been loving booties for
it's true
centuries. Yeah,
it's true. I think I just admire her relentless spirit, because she's out there, she's teaching these classes, she's like, here's my deal, this is my, I think it's really she's relentlessly joyful and encouraging of women to thrust their delicate business. And
that's what I love about these teachers. And then I'm like, what's your day like? You're not sitting in a cubicle for the rest of the day, right? No. You gyrate as you walk, like, if I saw you in a coffee shop, would would you be like squeezing the shoulders of the barista kind of and like encouraging them to, express themselves?
I hope so.
The beautiful people.
So.
Dance class.
They inspire me. I'm like, maybe I could be like that. Could I ever be like that? No, I know.
We can't, but that's what the class is that you imagine yourself as
a little freer.
Exactly.
A little more in our bodies. Yeah.
No, but we're nerds with headphones on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of.
Okay. So I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. I've been following her work for a while. I found it on Jessica Stanley's newsletter, Read, Look, Think. And she was constantly linking to Eloise Rickman's newsletter, Small Places, which really challenged me and pulled me into concepts that I had never thought about before. I didn't even like children's rights and the concept of adultism, which I had never encountered before I started reading Eloise's Substack. And it was really meaty, juicy stuff that was so far beyond like the usual parenting tropes. So Eloise is with us today. She has written a book called It's Not Fair, Why It's Time for a Grown-Up Conversation About How Adults Treat Children. And welcome, Eloise.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Eloise, were you named after the children's book character that lives in a hotel?
I was not, sadly.
Was she named after you?
I like to think so.
It's one of my favorite names.
My mum is French. And so with that comes all the like beautiful French culture. And so my mum really liked the name because there was like a medieval nun called Eloise who basically got jiggy with a monk called Abelard, who then was castrated because he was not allowed, obviously, to be like shacking up with his nun. But they wrote each other like beautiful love letters, which you can still read now. It was all like very very spicy.
My mum really liked the name because of that.
A sexy nun. I know.
That is the only thing better than the
Kay Thompson's Eloise.
Exactly, the adorable, disastrous, spunky, iconic children's book character. Wow, that was not what I was expecting, and I thank you. And your mom, I mean, maybe is that it? I did read Bringing Up Bebe, so I feel like I know what French child rearing is like, but I didn't see the chapter on like badass name inspirations.
I think my mom was actually raised in like a very strict kind of Bringing Up Bebe hardcore. So I think she actually really rebelled from that. And I was raised here in England. So, we like co-slept, we breastfed on demand. It was very like not Bringing Up Baby. So maybe that's why.
There we go.
Okay. Yes, we're all just rebelling against what our parents did.
Oh, man.
We didn't ask you who was caring for your kid right now. Is your kid... Well, it's late there.
It's like 5, 6 p.m. My husband is with her. So at the moment, because we home educate, we have like no childcare. But he is basically just working like nonstop at the moment because he's trying to finish his PhD, which is due in like a month.
Wow.
So things are intense in our house at the moment, but I kicked him out this afternoon. I was like, don't come back until like 7 p.m. because I'm doing a call and I just need some time by myself. So I don't know where they are. So they are somewhere.
That's
somewhere
lovely.
Outside.
Sometimes that's lovely.
I love not knowing where my kid is. Yeah.
Well, so let's get into your book because there's so much and I feel like we're not even going to get to all of it. But so Eloise, one of the things that, and we've talked about this a little bit before, that was really interesting to me is this whole concept of children's rights. And as a parent and as, a person trying to be good in the world, like it was sort of embarrassing to be like, oh, children's rights. I haven't thought about that before. Like, what a weird thing that we don't think about this and talk about it. And, that's one of your big ideas. So I really want you to sort of if you don't mind, kind of talking about your own journey with the concept of children's rights. And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, and I think that you don't have to feel embarrassed, because I think this is a position that basically, the grand majority of us as parents are in. When my daughter was born, I never thought about children's rights. For years, I don't think I could have named, maybe I would have said like, oh, the right to life or the right to be free from violence, because I have like a basic understanding of human rights. But really the idea of there being like specific children's rights which are enshrined into UN Convention is just not something I ever thought about, which makes me quite sad now, because as you say, it's a really big theme of my book. And in it, I really argue that teachers and parents and anyone who's working with children needs to be a little bit more educated in terms of what they are. So a very, very basic rundown is that in 1988, there was this kind of UN Convention on the Rights of a Child, which there are various kind of drafting stages, but kind of in 88, 89, this document was put together, and it enshrines all of these different rights into law. And what is quite interesting about it, and what makes it really different to kind of previous children's rights sort of documents or iterations, and I think which makes it quite a radical document even now, is that not only does it talk about things like children's right to be protected or children's rights to access certain provisions like healthcare and education, but it also really enshrines the right for children to participate in daily life and to be treated as kind of active citizens. So it talks about the right for children to be listened to be taken seriously, to be kind of active participants in the decisions which affect their lives day to day. So this can be really big decisions, like, in the case of parental divorce, who the child lives with. But it also is, the small decisions of daily life, which I think often as parents, it can feel like a real hassle to include your kids into some of these.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is when you look at it, it's like, oh, my child actually has a right to, have their voice taken seriously. And when you think so often of the kind of the attitude that some of us have, or that is enshrined in institutions, around like, oh, well, children's views, what do they know? Or they don't know what's best for themselves. Adults know best. And I think it provides a kind of foil to that, whilst also really stressing that actually, parents do have a really important role in bringing up children, and that this needs to be kind of taken into account with, they call kind of children's growing capacity to make those decisions for themselves.
I loved that idea when you write about that, and sort of like this whole idea of children's rights. I mean, something that I think is sort of bizarre and interesting and makes me curious about what's going on internally with myself, and then I think other parents too, and anyone who's with children. Sometimes when you say children's rights, there's this gut kind of ha, or like people kind of have this laugh reaction, like that's
yeah, I
silly.
brought it up at a table of drinks last night, and that was 100% the thing. Not, a very educated, thoughtful people who I think are, but is like the immediate response is like, what?
Right. But the second you start reading what the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child says, you start to feel like a real jerk for feeling like that was funny, because it's like, I guess what you're saying is that children are human, and that they're actually a particularly vulnerable population, and we must protect their rights, therefore. More maybe even than other, not necessarily putting them above anyone, but sort of like they need us to be really advocating for their rights because of the structures that we live in that don't allow them to advocate for their rights, by doing things like voting, for example, which we'll get into. But yeah, that idea of their evolving capacities and the responsibility that the adults around them have to be aware that their capacity is evolving all the time. And so to keep giving them the opportunity, I thought that was very interesting.
Eloise, can you give like some examples of that? I'm thinking, my kids have the right to the candy drawer, but other than that, I'm pretty new to this. And like, when you talk about, I think you were talking about kind of like this, like, I'm thinking of like an upside down triangle of like the, the kind of societal rights and the cultural rights, and then kind of like the rights within relationships with adults in kind of like, daily life. Can you give us some examples at each of those levels of what, your people are looking for?
Yeah. So I think a really easy, kind of maybe straightforward way of looking at it is to think about rights in terms of maybe like three different groups, which is sometimes known in the nerdy children's rights circles as like the three Ps. So you can talk about protection rights, which are, as you said, like big kind of societal, like we need to protect children from exploitation, from violence, from torture. We need to protect children's right to life. So I think a lot of that feels quite self-explanatory. Although, I mean, even that, thinking about children's protection, we immediately come up with things like, well, why is it that like in England, where I'm recording from, and in lots of states of the US, it's still legal to smack your child, or as you might call it, like spanking, in turn, like as a discipline, as a parent. So immediately, even though this stuff is kind of enshrined into the UN Convention, like children have a right to be free from violence. Like we would never have documents on women's rights where we're like, oh, well, women should be free from violence, apart from if their partner decides that, like, they're not doing a good enough job.
Well, we might soon.
They can be hit.
Yeah, if
the way things are going here. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So, even within those, which can be seen as quite basic, there are huge problems still with kind of what children are promised versus what children are getting. And we can also see it globally as well, in terms of like conflict zones and wars and all sorts of kind of exploitation happening. I think it's also interesting to point out, especially as you guys are both based in the US, that the US is the only country in the entire world at the moment to have not ratified the UN Convention on Children's Rights, which is really interesting. So like all the, and I think both is very interesting, but also in some ways speaks to the kind of the very neutral language that it is written in to enable countries which absolutely, they don't even pay lip service to children's rights. They really just don't care about children's welfare at all, have still signed up to this document. But in the US, it is seen by many as like being kind of counter to parental rights, or being kind of, it's unconstitutional to sign up to something which is, kind of bigger than the US. So that is just an interesting aside. So you can look at those kind of protection rights. You can also look, as I said, at kind of things that we should be giving children.
What's the P for that?
Provision.
Provision.
So we've got protection, we've got provision. So things like healthcare, which again, I think in the US is really salient, like free healthcare for everyone. Things like education, things like a decent standard of living. And again, it's quite radical when you read that actually, governments have a duty to provide a kind of decent standard of living for children, which again, definitely here in the UK is not at all happening. We have huge child poverty crisis, the same for you guys as well. So we still have a really long way to go. And then the kind of the participation rights, which is the third, which is things like being listened to, being taken seriously, having access to information. And what's really interesting, when we talk about things like children's right to privacy and children's right to access information, again, I think I see this especially in the US, but it's been really interesting to me and very sad to see some groups of parents kind of co-opt the language of rights and children's rights in order to do things like ban books or, like get gay teachers fired or ban all discussion of like trans healthcare and things like this, because they're like, we just want to save the children. We just want to protect the children's innocence, which actually, not only are these actively causing children harm and going against children's rights, but it just makes a whole mockery of the language of rights itself, which I think can be quite confusing for people, because it's like, well, hang on, what rights are we talking about? And like you say, then what about talking about like, well, I have a right to keep my light on until 9 p.m. or I have a right to take candy whenever I want to. So I feel like the language of rights is not necessarily always very clear, which makes it then, when you're a tired parent, that's the last thing you want to be doing is working through all of this stuff and trying to figure out,
This is something I want you to keep going. And I want to just interject, like when we spoke before, we talked about something that resonated with me as a parent is, and something that has felt, I guess, sometimes empty about certain parenting influencers' work, like Dr. Becky or Janet Lansbury's Unruffled, and this sort of parenting moment that we're in where there's a lot of scripts and there's a lot of do it this way. And what's, I think, missing is instead of a, well, this is because of data or what, psychology studies. And that is the why behind Dr. Becky.
Right, because it's better for kids and it's what their brains need.
Studies show, and instead of that,
and it'll work.
Right, and I think
strategy.
But it's a pretty wildly different framework to decide that you are going to, make collaborative decisions with your kid or whatever that is, meet them where they are, let them express themselves, and your why is because you respect their right as a human being and as a whole being. Like you are not becoming, you are here and you are whole and you are real and you deserve the same rights, that every human does. And I think that is so simple, and it's actually very hard to argue with. Like, I think that
it's a little sturdier than this piece that we talk about a lot on the show, which is that like there isn't actually, all of these strategies about parenting that are, child-centered, aren't there isn't really research to support them. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. I do lots of things that there's not research to support, like, enjoy
Candy
my hip hop dance class. Exactly. But, but we kind of, I think parents are under the false impression that we're doing this because it works.
It's the best.
And it's the best. And and actually, if you asked people, like, if you drill down with someone like a Dr. Becky, I think they would, what they would come up with is something close to what you're saying, that participation piece. But treating it as an ethical decision, I agree with you, Miranda, makes it more, it's more defensible.
Oh yeah. And and I also
you don't
think
have to agree with it, but
when I was sitting there reading this book with my husband last night, revisiting some of your ideas to prepare for the call,
like side by side, and are you taking turns page by page or something?
No, he's reading Hyperion, and I was reading this.
You're doing parallel reading. Are you holding hands, and then one hand is holding the book?
No, we were sitting at our favorite little bar, and we were.
You go on your reading dates. Okay.
We go on our reading dates.
All right, now I have an image. Go on.
And so
I'm a visual learner.
Was sharing some of these ideas, and it's so, as I referenced earlier, I think it is an idea where parents and adults have this gut level initial reaction, but the second it only takes maybe like one more sentence. Like if I say something like, maybe kids should vote, and then he says, that's crazy. And then I say, well, define a child. Like, first, could you define a child? What is that? Who decides and why? And then he's like, that's a terrible impression of David. He doesn't sound like that. But he said, and then the more we talked about it, he said, oh, well, I don't disagree with that. And it became very quickly, you see that these are relatively logical, basic ideas that most of us actually do kind of agree with.
It's been really nice actually that so many people who have read the book have said that. Actually, that's been really pleasing feedback for me to hear. They're like, oh, this just makes so much sense. Like I was really going into this ready to be like, come on, I'm gearing up for a fight. I want to kind of almost find this ridiculous, or like I expected it to like agree with some of it, but then some of it to feel like it's just too far. But actually, this is a really logical thing. And it's and I think because we are now getting better, thankfully, at recognizing things like sexism and racism and ableism. And so I think collectively we are maybe even like from 5 years or 10 years ago, maybe in a different space to hear some of these arguments. But I think now people are like, if we assume that like children are people, then this actually raises quite a lot of like questions around ethics and around power and around social justice and around who gets to be the person in charge. And so it pleases me greatly to hear you say that it is a sensible argument. And I think it is really fascinating when, I read a lot of parenting books when my daughter was younger and felt like, a lot of them were really useful to me, but so many of them felt like they went far to a certain point, and then they just felt like they weren't quite going far enough in terms of really positioning this as a kind of, like a political relationship. Just as we know now to position like men and women in terms of like, yes, you might be in a romantic relationship, but it is still also a political one.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't feel like that all the time, but you are in that political relationship. And I feel like the relationship we have with our children is deeply based on, negotiations of power and politics. And there is so much kind of cultural understanding of, as you say, what makes a child, what makes an adult, how do we define those, what are those roles? And this is why I start the first chapter of the book is really trying to talk about, like, what is it to be a child? What does that mean? And I think once you start recognizing that childhood is at least kind of partially socially constructed, then if something is socially constructed, you can start deconstructing it and kind of picking it apart and creatively examining it and having some critique, just as I think we have done with gender and with, the way people are racialized and things like this. And so I think once you start seeing children as another relationship to look at this way, it starts making a little bit more sense, which I think so many parenting books and advice don't quite go far enough in kind of joining those dots.
Can you talk more about how childhood is socially constructed?
Yeah, of course. So, if I said to you, like, what is a child, for example, I think most people listening would be like, well, what a ridiculous question. It's just someone under 18.
Yeah.
But then immediately when you start thinking about it, like, when you were a teenager, did you feel like a child? What did that mean to you? Like, I know my daughter is 9 years old. And already she started being like, well, I'm not like a child, I'm a tween. And she feels that really deeply within herself. She's like, I'm not a young child like my cousins. I'm an older child. I'm not really a child anymore. And certainly as a teenager, I don't feel like I would have thought about myself in those terms. I might have said like, I'm a teen or I'm a young person. And then when you look around the world at like, what are the definitions of childhood? There are some, so my first degree was in anthropology, which I think makes me particularly interested in this stuff. But, you look at certain religions or certain communities or groups, and adulthood will be marked on like rituals or social rites of passage. So for example, you might not be considered a woman until you've had a child or until you're married. In Judaism, for example, although you might legally become an adult at age 18, you have the bat mitzvah and the bar mitzvah, at which point you're considered to be kind of responsible for your actions.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start looking at these things, it becomes a little bit more blurred in terms of, well, what does it mean to be a child? And I think we often now will think about things in terms of like brain development. So like, oh, well, a child is someone whose brain is still developing. And
right.
But then actually our brains change and develop throughout our lives. And, there's lots of evidence to suggest bits of our brains aren't finished really until the 20s. But what does it even mean to be finished? Like, well into your 80s, your brain is still changing and your body is changing.
And some adults are really bad at making decisions.
Right.
But we let them do it anyway.
Well, right. We were talking about the vote. I think the voting question, and I know you've written about it, and I think it's a really fascinating sort of, because it activates people right away when you say, should kids vote, and they get really up about it.
Too, just some news that this year in November will be the first year that in Oakland, where I live, and in Berkeley, 16 and 17-year-olds can vote in the school board elections.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Which is like, it influences them.
Yeah, amazing.
That is awesome. Well, no, I wanted to see if Eloise wants to talk about that sort of very interesting little, because I think it comes from this question, and I don't want to, I say this a lot, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I was thinking about when my husband and I were talking about this last night, like, his grandma is very old and diminishing a bit, and I said, what, but she can vote and no one would ever question that. Right. And so why is it so wild to say like, well, maybe a 12-year-old should vote, or maybe, and our son Griffin is 6.5. And David said, well, I don't want like Griffin to vote. And I was like, why not? Like this affects him. This impacts him cognitively. I don't know. You could argue that he and grandma are like similarly of similar capacities, so and then it does get really messy really fast.
It does. And I think voting is such a good example to talk about, because I think it really highlights adultism and the way that we treat children differently to other groups of people.
Will you define adultism for me? Because
yes.
I did, that is the research I did. I did look it up. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm so into isms, and it's not something I was familiar with.
When you Googled it, did a porn site come up?
The first, the first site is a porn site. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
Like, my deep career goal
but
is
only
for, like,
the first.
one day for it to not be the first.
Maybe we will do that. Like... If enough people Google adultism and click on links that are not porn right now, we can change the structure of Google.
Oh my gosh. I mean, porn made the internet, right? So I don't know if we
know what? We should give porn its due.
Just give up.
It's paying a lot of bills. Go on.
So anyway, adultism is not porn. So let's start with that.
Check.
Very important.
Yeah.
So just as we talk about things like racism and sexism and ableism, I think we can see adultism in the same way, in that it is something structural, not just within individual relationships. So it's embedded into our institutions, into our laws, into our kind of culture and practices, into our language. And it is, it's been defined in different ways. I tend to define it as broadly the kind of structural discrimination and marginalization of children by adults. And just like with everything else, it doesn't mean that all children have terrible lives, all adults have amazing lives, but it does mean that just as we can talk about like white privilege, it can be interesting to think about adult privilege. So things like, I can vote for my representatives. When I read about people in my age group, it's written by people who are broadly in the same age category as I am. There are all sorts of things, people don't tend to be able to control my movements or tell me what to eat or what to wear. There are lots of different things you can kind of go through. And it's the idea that we live in a society which is kind of structured for the needs and wants of adults. Mm-hmm. Although actually, as I argue in the book, a lot of adultism actually makes life really difficult for a lot of us, especially parents and families and caregivers.
Can you,
things like childcare or maternity leave, especially where you guys are in the US, maternity leave, parental leave tends to be pretty appalling. Here it is better, but still not as amazing as somewhere like, Scandinavian countries, of course. Looking at, again, childcare options, having childcare be both really unaffordable and often really patchy in terms of quality. This isn't good for children, but it's also not good for parents. Like, no one loves this. No one is like, hey, we want zero maternity leave and overpriced, crappy childcare. Of course we don't.
But it comes out of this idea that I also like the definition, it's better to be an adult than a kid. Of just like that we just prioritize adult needs, which are, having people stay in the workplace and, rather than the needs of kids, which is having a caregiver.
Yeah. It's such
and
a
often
simple
both adult
thing.
needs are kind of capitalist needs as well.
Right.
Yes.
Like, they're not actually like...
I was thinking too about like urban planning and how, so this is something a friend brought up at the table last night too, was like that we design our spaces for adults and then it kind of sucks for everyone, right? Like we make way for cars because they're more convenient for adults and adults like them, and then more people die and and we find ourselves, we built these neighborhoods where all the businesses kind of cater to adults, and then like the teenagers have nowhere to go, but that backfires because you're a parent who's got your teenager just hanging out at home because there's no chill spaces anymore.
And what we were talking, I want to have someone on, this is like, get ready, listeners. There's a couple people working on this at the London School of Economics I saw, thinking about urban planning and children and children's rights. And so everyone get ready, but stay tuned. But I think that thinking about dismantling adultism, which you talk about, as a sort of via parenting and and you frame parenting as a radical act, which I love and I think is so interesting. But then your suggestions for the how to do that. And I should say too, this is not really a parenting book. It's a work of like sociology and philosophy, to me, is how I feel. But that very much applies to parenting. And but some of your suggestions are very simple, like just be in solidarity with children, like, which is something that we talked about before on the podcast with Catherine Moose.
What does that look like? Yeah, solidarity. Is that yes, you can buy another Pokemon pack? The fourth P, by the way, is Pokemon. I think my son would want you to know.
Oh my goodness. I know so much about Pokemon. I feel like I could now do like, I don't know, a really high level quiz on Pokemon. I've learned,
or your
more
next
than
book.
I ever thought I needed to know. It's a lot.
But so Eloise, talk a little bit, if you would, about, ways that we can be in solidarity with children and help advocate and look out for their rights.
So I think like one example which always really comes to mind is, if your kid comes home from school, for example, and is like, oh, we have a lot of like detention. So, you have to stay after school, you have to do some probably boring work, which has no relevance to your life. Or like, I got into trouble and I think our, default positions is either going to be something like, being even crosser with them. Like, why did you break rules then? Some parents will either like double down and enact more punishments on top of that, or to try and just be like, oh, you did nothing wrong. You probably didn't do it, and I think actually being in solidarity is just being like, yeah, this is the system. Education systems are kind of geared up like this. Like, it's not great, but I don't blame you. I'm sitting in solidarity with you. Like, I have a whole chapter where I talk about the education system and how, I mean, unless you're very lucky, often schools are incredibly punitive. Like, definitely here in the UK, they're becoming more punitive. Though we've just had a change of government, so it'll be interesting to see what will happen.
More punitive?
Well, actually, I say that becoming more punitive. I don't think that is across the board. And actually, I think what we're starting to see is that in especially lower income areas, we're having real like schools doubling down on like zero tolerance. And actually some of the educational like things which have come from the US, so things like slant, where you've got to like sit up, look forward. And I visited a school which that kind of that, like
KIP school philosophy of like, that the way to kind of get kids who usually underperform to perform is like to have this uniform stuff.
It feels very culty, actually, like when you see it in action.
It does.
But then the schools do get like better results academically. I think the schools who are kind of pushing back against that, and now again in the UK, we have a number of schools who have signed up to be like rights respecting schools, and it's a whole accreditation they can go through, and they will often like sometimes they won't have school uniforms, which here tends to be the norm. They will have children being more involved in like the school decision making processes. They might not have kind of punitive measures if children are like going against the rules. They might seek to kind of just understand what's going on for the kids instead. Often they are in more like affluent areas. So it feels like it's almost starting to become a bit of a kind of two-tier system, which, I mean, we already have because of private schools, but within even state-funded education, a kind of two-tier system where some schools are just getting stricter. So I think being in solidarity, but also I think really advocating for your child in terms of like writing to representatives, talking about stuff on social media. Like, that's why the subtitle of my book was about trying to have a conversation. I think like talking to people just like you were doing yesterday over drinks, and trying to just, as we would with, I think, other causes that we care about, trying to show up for that in kind of whichever way we can. So a really lovely message I got was from someone who's a childminder. So she works from her own home. She has like a little preschool. And she has just started in her hallway of her home, like a little lending library. So she just put some boards up. She's got some books on children's rights. And she's like, oh, I'm hoping that this will spark conversations with caregivers and parents, and that they'll be able to borrow some books. So I feel like even very small acts like that just show like, hey, I'm in solidarity with you. I care. I'm trying to spread the word.
I love, I want to just say like the thing that you mentioned in your book and that we talked about before too is the idea of informing children of their rights. Like that's so basic. It's it feels really doable as a parent. You're like, I could at least talk to my kid about the fact that they have rights and that I believe they have rights. Well, I told Griffin, I talked to Griffin about it. He, how did I put it? I mean, Eloise, you should say, or you mentioned in the book the simple idea of you can print out from the UN, and we'll link this on our Substack. You can print out a poster that really visually demonstrates all of the rights that are enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's this beautiful, colorful poster. You have to like print it out yourself, but you could just put it up in your home and talk to your kid about it. And, talk to other kids who come to your house and talk to parents. And this reminds me a lot of our conversation with Lucy Jones about matrescence and just very basic consciousness raising efforts.
Yeah, and you can get some really nice now, like picture books as well.
Yeah,
sadly, there's not much for older children, but there are like some gorgeous picture books, which is like, I have the right to do this or to do that. And it has some nice pictures and you can kind of chat about them. And I think you can, it's not about like, right, child, let's sit down and have a big conversation about your rights. It's more like, when they're at the playground, like, do you know that you have a right to play? Like, this is something all children should be allowed to do. Or like, sadly, as I was saying before, we have really high poverty here in the UK. So we have sometimes done shops for like our local food banks. And we talk about the fact that everyone has a right to have enough food to eat and to have like a decent standard of living. And unfortunately, not everyone has that. So sometimes we try and help out. Or at the moment with what's happening in Gaza, we talk about, how people have a right to life and how we might want to show solidarity. So I think you can do it in a really age appropriate way as well. Like, probably you're not going to be sitting down your 2-year-old and being like, do you know you have the right to not be tortured? Because like, and no
because you want to torture them. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, you must get a lot of like dark jokes about how people don't actually want to give their kids rights. Yeah. And I gotta say, it's like I do have. I mean, all the stuff like teaching about larger stuff sounds fun, but the stuff about the home sounds hard too. Where I'm like, well, my son has been. He just turned 8. He's doing a lot of like, kind of like. If you get, if I can't watch screens today, you can't watch screens, and like, kind of like, how come you get this and I don't? And I'm kind of like, this is very adultist, but I'm say, cause I'm an adult, or it doesn't work that way. And I am a little uncomfortable with it, but I still feel like, well, wait, I do know more than you about the world, and it is like not great for you to spend a second weekend day totally on screens. And, so that is hard to navigate.
Eloise, you really do a nice job in the book of talking about, like, you use this diapering example that I love, and you can share that if you want, or a different one, like, where you really illustrate well, like in your own parenting with, your daughter, how you navigate, because of course any rights conversation you have your rights, they have theirs, and you negotiate together. It seems to me, what happens now, and it really is this whole ethical thing.
It really is, and I actually think one of the most impactful things I've done as a parent at all is just to talk to my daughter about like power and about adultism, which has also been one of the hardest things I've done, because for maybe the last couple of years, often if I do something she doesn't like, she's like, stop, you're using your power over me, or you're acting in a really adultist way. And it immediately, like 100% of the time, just stops me in my tracks, because I'm like, whoa, it's like if I was saying to my husband, stop, you're being really sexist right now. Or if someone said to me, stop, that's really racist. So it immediately kind of stops me, and I have to really think about it. And sometimes I will say to her, right? Like, absolutely, I take it back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But sometimes, like Sarah was saying, you do have to be like, yes. And for example, with the like screens example, you might be like, but also you have a right to the best possible health. And like, I have a responsibility as your parent to like help support you to enjoy that right. And actually right now I can see that like having another day rotting on a screen is maybe not going to be the best choice for your health. And so like, I don't always it's not about like, well, the kids rule the roost. That's often a critique I get. It's just about like being in relationship together and trying to figure stuff out, whilst also having that additional dynamic of you are responsible for your child's well-being. Like we are also tend to be like pretty relaxed about stuff like, food and snacks or whatever. But like if she wasn't eating a vegetable for days, I would be like, hey, it's time to eat some vegetables.
Yeah.
Because
when
I'm your
my
mom
kid's
and
like, I can't poop, and you're like, I think it's the 9 bags of Doritos.
And nothing else. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she knows, but she needs to like brush her teeth and stuff.
And wear a helmet or these.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There are non-negotiables. It's not just about being like, whatever, you have a right to like sort yourself out. Like,
And the
that is
responsibility,
neglectful parenting.
But it's interesting. You're even like, there's interesting, this cool relational piece too, where like, there's actually a lot of decisions we make, not because of adultism, but like because we are protecting our children, I think in a developmentally appropriate way, but we're not, because it kind of comes off as this power struggle, we're not actually making that explicit to kids, you know? And so actually saying like, well, I think, you have the right to health, and I don't, cavities really suck, and they feel painful, and they, they can lead to long-term health stuff. And so I'm trying to protect you from that by encouraging you to brush your teeth.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it's just about, I think, having respect for each other. And then I think it also really helps me to talk about my own needs. Like at the moment, my daughter is going to bed much later because she's a tween, and suddenly we're having this shift where she's just not tired in the evenings. Whereas so her energy, she starts off in the morning and she's all like yawning and like, oh, I'm tired. And then I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, this is like, my energy is good. I've just had a coffee. I'm fine. Whereas by like 8 or 9 p.m., I'm just like, I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to lie in bed and read my book and like not speak to another human. And so we've had lots of conversations where I'm like, our needs are really different, but right now, like, this is what I need. And I need you to have like done all of your stuff by 9 p.m., like brush your teeth, so I'm not running around the house nagging you to do it, so that I can then just like mentally switch off. You don't have to go to bed, you don't have to go to sleep, but like, can you just be ready at a certain time so that I now know that like my parenting is done for the day? And I think trying to just be open, and I mean, it helps, but like, as you guys were talking about at the beginning, like my daughter is now at that age where that is possible. If you have a 2-year-old, it's going to be impossible to start having those conversations, but you can, I think, like, you can lay the foundations for it. But it is like, I also really want to stress that like our house is not this perfect, like rights respecting utopia. Like I often do really shitty parenting, and like it's life, isn't it? I try not to beat myself up about it, because it's just like, I'm a human. Just as kids are people, we're also people, and people mess up all the time.
People do shitty parenting. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Well, one thing, the last little thing that we wanted to talk about was school, because this comes up a lot. And Sarah and I, as you've listened to the podcast, our kids go to public school. And I think that is I think Sarah and I both, certainly me, like I'm privileged to be a person who has made that choice very consciously. We opted to spend our money to buy a house in a neighborhood near a school that we wanted to go to, instead of staying in a cheaper house and doing private school. And so it was a very conscious choice, and it was wrapped up in ideas about citizenship and what I owed to, owe other families or owe the city, and having an awareness that having my son's butt in his seat brought more money to my, public school district. And that was something that I felt I wanted to do. And, but I know that, and so that's a form to me of my parenthood as a political act. Right. And so, but I know that I think you homeschool.
Yeah.
Is that right? And so I wanted to talk, I think that on a knee-jerk level, I was engaging with your material, and then I thought, well, like, is the homeschooling an essential part of this? Like, how is that in conflict with decisions I have made or beliefs that I have about how I must sort of like utilize my privilege, or, you know, I think you know what I'm getting at. But
Yeah.
and Sarah, jump in if you want. But Eloise, I'd love to know how you think about that.
Yeah, and I think the system in the US is quite different because I think it is based on like your tax dollars. You know, your child's school will get more money if you send them there. Whereas in the UK, it's not like that. Like we're saving the state money, if you will, because we get no money to home educate.
That is true. And I think there's like, that's an ethical part of it for me, is like contributing to the pot of money that the public schools get. But there's also to me, like an ethical duty towards my child, where to me, like that choice is about, you know, making my child like a citizen of the world and having them, you know, kind of see the way that, you know, that our society is and navigate how to continue to like care for themselves and live their best life and care for other people within it. So yeah, I'm curious about your take on this, Eloise.
First think that like there is no, like you were saying, Miranda, is home educating a core part of this? Absolutely not. I think it's a really personal decision. I think it's also like a lot of people who talk about home education, especially online, especially on like Instagram, will be like, this is the best thing ever. This is the only way to like respect your child's rights. School is some like awful prison place. Like, I just don't believe that. And I don't think it's fair. And I think it's very polarizing. I also think there needs to be like much more solidarity between home educating parents and parents who use school, because like you never know, like something could happen and our daughter could start school tomorrow, or she could choose to go to school. Like at this point, it's really her choice. And ditto, like, you know, I have also met lots of parents who are like, school was working until it just wasn't. And like, you know, even my child was being really badly bullied, or we realized they were neurodivergent and they had been masking, but then it became too much for them.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the demands of a curriculum were really difficult and it had really impacted my child's ability to learn. So I feel like there needs to be much more like cross-parent solidarity of just like, we fundamentally all want our kids to like be okay and to be good citizens and good people. Again, Sarah, like I can
Sarah McKendrick, I can mispronouncing her name, but she wrote Ordinary Insanity. She
McKendon.
Oh gosh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
So she has a lovely Substack, and she's been writing in the last year about taking her child out of
Sarah Mankiewicz. Apologies.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So she recently wrote about a journey like that, where she's upending her life to homeschool her daughter, and I think she writes that it's related to bullying and things like that. And I was reading it with a lot of interest because sort of like some of my initial gut reactions to your ideas, you know, whenever I have a knee-jerk gut, my yoga teacher would call it like habit, like examine your habitual responses to things and maybe question those. And I think I love what you're saying about, you know, more solidarity. And it feels like yet another place where we do tend to have knee-jerk reactions to choices other parents make. And when we have those reactions, it's, at least me, when I have those reactions, it usually circles back to some insecurity that I have about a decision that I've made. Because parenting is nothing but true. Like, you know,
I have a lot of that. And I also, you know, with the school piece, I do have another piece of it that's like, be part of the culture. Even though I do, you know, I work with parents of neurodivergent kids. I agree with you, Eloise. Like there's so many individual differences, and there's so many situations where a specific school or school situation just doesn't work for a kid and a family. So I totally allow for that. But just kind of as a general principle.
But I think also
I want people to have considered that to, you know.
I think that there's also often this sense that like if you home educate, you're basically just like hyper individualist. You don't care about community, you only care about your kid.
I think I actually have that stereotype.
I have seen so much like beautiful, like, I mean, I'm quite lucky. I live in London. We have a really big home ed community near us. And I think I also, maybe before we started home educating, so we've always home educated. My daughter has never been to school. But I think I maybe had also had some stereotypes about like what kind of parents it would be, or like, but it's such a like, I guess just like any public school, it's just like any other group of parents. We have like huge like racial diversity, religious diversity. It's definitely not all like privileged rich people. A lot of people are, in fact, I think struggling quite a lot financially or working different jobs because they feel like there is sky high levels of neurodivergence and learning disability, I think, within our kind of home ed community. I would say I feel like more kids than not in our local area are neurodivergent. And I think actually what is really beautiful is that when I see, for example, like some of my daughter's friends, I'm like, if you were in school right now, you would be essentially, whether it was purposeful or not, you would have internalized sense that like you're stupid. Other people would have the sense that like you're naughty or you're bad. But like there is so much beautiful, just like we care about each other. We're just all different. There's a lot of like inclusivity within our local community. There's a lot of helping each other out, just like there is with school communities. Like you pick up your friends' kids or you take them for play dates. So I think I've actually been quite surprised by like how diverse and vibrant, and in many ways just how similar it is, except I would say there is like higher levels of need. And I feel like so often these are actually, and again, maybe it is quite different in the US, but certainly here in the UK, I get the sense that it's lots of families who are just like, if there was a better option, I would choose school, but there just isn't one. And the school system here has been really run down for a long time. You know, and also I think you get quite a lot of families who start off like we did by choice, being like, oh, this is kind of, you know, we just never signed her up to nursery, then never signed her up to preschool. And then I was, you know, my husband and I both really enjoyed it and were like, we'll just carry on. It seems to really suit her. We also had some philosophical, I guess, differences. Like where we live, there is not much at all in the way of like alternative schools. So it's just like the bog standard state funded school or the highway. And there is still, you know, even for young children, very like punitive approach to behavior, you know, telling kids off, like traffic light systems, which can be really shaming. We just, I mean, we, with a huge amount of privilege, we were just like, we just don't want that kind of education for her. We don't want education to be tied up with ideas of like being in competition with your peers, or that like your worth is somehow linked to like how a teacher gets on with you. Or yeah, and I think like, although it is interesting because my husband and I both did very well in the kind of school system. We both went on to really good universities. We were both fine. Although in hindsight, like I have ADHD, which was diagnosed as an adult. And when I look back, I'm like, the reasons I was always like getting sent out for talking or that like, you know, it makes a lot of sense now. So that is quite interesting, but like it kind of, I still managed okay.
You're my
but
neuro
I think we
sister.
both, for quite different ways, were like, we'll just give it a go and see how it goes.
Well, it's really, I think
that all tracks.
It does. Thanks. And I think it's also, there are probably, you know, structural differences in the UK versus US systems too. And I think that we're all just trying to figure out what makes sense for us as parents and for our own children. And
I think I have a hard time with like a blanket assumption that all schools, especially public schools, will be a place that, which is not what you're saying at all, will be a place that like strips your child of their rights, like you said, of that kind of like this prison, you know, and just having worked in schools, I mean, there's such variety, and I've seen all the things that you're saying, you know, places where kids are really stigmatized and shamed, and the traffic light stuff, you know, the like, I do hate that. And some kids can get by and it's fine, but for other kids, it's really bad. And everyone's internalizing something that isn't my favorite, as I would say. And I've just seen a lot of schools and classrooms that really work in lots of different ways. And so I think, I bristle with like, you know, this is a factory for capitalists. And even though I understand, of course, that there are things that are part of the system that 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 do set kids up for that. But I think it's just so much more complicated, and it's tricky socially and politically because, you know, at least in this country, I think that's interesting, Eloise, about the diversity of the homeschooling. I think in Oakland we see that too. There are lots of families of color and religious families who homeschool, and so there's some variety. But in this country, particularly, like, public education has become a place where like class and race is so divided. And so there's that layer too of just kind of that that opting out of the public school, depending on where you are, is kind of a choice to have your kids around more wealthy kids, more white kids. Yeah.
As I referenced, like, we moved into we needed a little more space, but we like have a crushing mortgage to be near a public school that I like, you know, that I felt this is a nice place. I think the principal is nice. I think the teachers are good. I think the vibe is good, you know. So that was a privilege to make that choice. And if I lived closer to like one of the quote unquote crappy ones, like, I wouldn't have
and my kid goes to one of the crappy ones and he loves it. So it's like it
I
is
also think like schools, and I talk a bit about this in the book, like schools are also like, again, one of the problems I have with this, like, oh, well, kids who go to school are just all like oppressed. Like, schools are these amazing like hotbeds of child resistance and like struggle for children's liberation. Like, you know, I remember, and I think I write about this in the book, how like at secondary school, I was always getting chucked out of class and like told off because I was always wearing earrings, like big earrings. I would wear like really big, bright, colorful earrings, which were completely like against our school dress code. Or I would wear those, like, you can tell I grew up in the like 90s and 2000s. I would wear those like really big baggy flares as my black school trousers. But again, this is with a uniform. So I would sometimes like get told off for wearing those. Like, you know, I would chew gum all the time.
You were writing my husband and I were both talking about it.
We were like, this is like, because we needed something to do because of ADHD. Like, I was constantly like chewing gum.
Yes, that was
all
a
this
great
stuff, like,
tool.
I knew, it
Good
was, but
workaround,
I would
Eloise.
constantly get told off. Like, and I just kept doing it. And even at the time, I was probably like, why do I just keep doing this stuff? But now I look back on it and I'm like, because I didn't like someone else telling me what to do with my body. Like, my earrings were not affecting my ability to learn. Like, case in point, like, I did fine in my exams, you know, it wasn't a problem. But I just hated the like arbitrariness of it.
Oh yeah.
The fact that like, we had to wear these like annoying, uncomfortable uniforms. Like, you know, from the ages of 11 to 13, I had to wear a tie. Like, who wears a tie? You know, it's just, so I think there are also, like, wherever there is power, there is always a pushback.
It can almost be like sending your child. I'm thinking about like for Griffin, when and I talked about this before, like when they have lockdown drills, I pull him out and we skip them, and it's my like one of my little like resistance things, but it's actually a moment where I didn't think of it this way, but I think I actually am talking to him about his rights. And I let it, the second time I did it, I let him choose. And I explained what was happening at school, and I explained why, and I explained why I thought he didn't need to go, but that it was up to him if he wanted to do it and to see it. And you know, I didn't use language about children's rights, but I think that is kind of something I was trying to express, was like, things will happen in this building and you don't have to do everything that happens in this building, and I can take you out for ice cream instead.
And you have the right to feel safe, or
And
I had the right. I was trying to exercise a right that I had as like a citizen and a parent, and say, well, I get that this is mandatory and I'm going to opt out, and you know, and see what happens. And
yes, I resisted against school a lot and found my protest power definitely against the establishment as a young person. And like, you know, there are schools that are teaching this as well, you know, that are teaching resistance. And like, you know, like in my son's third grade classroom, they have the tenets of Black Lives Matter up on the walls, and they teach about the Black Panthers. And they, you know, and like all their little assemblies start with like the school-wide list of, I never thought about this, but use the phrase right. like I have the right to feel safe, I have the right to learn, and I have the right to make good choices, which is a workaround. It's really about doing what adults want. But you know, so there are so many, I think, inspiring educators who are teaching resistance and participation. You know, my son's class, they're coming up together with like the school with their classroom agreements this week, and then kind of like you know, so stuff like that.
Yeah. It's all the stuff that like Donald Trump people are super pissed off about, right? Like this is exactly what they think is going on.
Like Eloise said, although they say that they're working for children's rights, that's very tricky.
Yeah. Well, so I think this is so nuanced and fascinating, and I wish we could talk for 8 hours, but you'll just have to come back again. Well, thank you for everything. This has been, it's so rich.
Thank you for having me.
I love talking to you. You're just a delight. And so before we let you go, do you want to share any culture recommendations? And anything you want. Anything is culture.
So because I'm a long-time listener of the podcast, I was like, I bet they're going to ask me. But I have basically, since the book came out, I've just been on like binging like romantasy series and like trashy, like, you know, historical fiction with like witches and vampires and stuff. But I was like, have I done anything like remotely cultural? I mean, it is culture,
Eloise.
It's culture, but like it's culture. Not everyone wants to like rewatch World War Z on Netflix. I mean, you know, I don't know who those people are, but you know, there may conceivably be some people who are not like. And I think this is maybe an external manifestation of like the inner turmoil of seeing the world around at the moment. But I have been really drawn to like rewatching old like disaster movies and things. But I did recently watch a beautiful film, which I think is just on Netflix, which is adapted from a really short book, and it's called The End We Start From. I don't know if either of you have heard it. So it's basically, it's set here in Britain. And without like giving too much away, it's a kind of cli-fi type book. I don't even know if it's like, you know, book set in like when the climate crisis has
cli-fi
moved forward.
I did see this trailer, but so it's good. You recommend?
But it's really beautiful. I mean, I would say maybe watch it when you're feeling emotionally resilient. Like it's not a dreadfully sad film, but it's quite like intense. I cried a lot.
This is the Jodie Comer and the dude who looks like Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, I think it is Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh my God, it is Benedict Cumberbatch. How does he do that? It doesn't, when I don't know that I've ever seen him like in, it's not modern day, but like not in the past, or, you know, looking like he's from the past. So I would watch it just for that. For like
I mean, he was good, and Jodie Comer was fantastic as well.
Yeah, she's great.
So I really recommend that. It's good, but I think it's also really positive that we're having more like good media around the climate crisis, because I think it's so much more accessible to a lot of people than like just reading miserable news reports.
You mean like it turns out well?
Well, it makes us think about it.
Maybe it's not a crisis.
And motivates us.
The right has a lot of good media about the climate crisis. No, but you're saying
anyway,
this
it was nice
beautiful.
to watch something which like doesn't shy away from it. It's a bit like Don't Look Up or something, although more beautiful than that. So I really recommend it. And I must say, I also read the book beforehand, which is very short.
That's very cultured.
Which I did not like. I didn't hate it, but also because it was very short and it was written in quite a specific style. It's one of those rare things where I was like, actually, the movie, if you're going to read one or like either read it or watch it, I would watch it.
Okay. So be less cultured. You have permission from Eloise Rickman.
So she knows just watch the movie.
She was named
just
after
watch World War Z.
A sexy nun. By the way, I Googled sexy nun and I also got porn. What's up with that?
Surprise.
Send us the link, please, to the Wikipedia page of your namesake.
Eloise, but like with a H, because it's the old-fashioned French spelling. So it's Abelard and Eloise with a H.
You're gonna have to email that to me.
I'll email
I
it
didn't
to
understand
you guys.
anything you just said.
You're in for a treat. But actually, and my mum bought me as a teenager the love letters of the sexy monk and the sexy nun.
Will you just will you just take a picture of one? Are they like very?
I'll dig that out of the book. Yeah, I'll see.
God,
I'm sure I've got it somewhere.
When you've been castrated, what's in your love letters? Oof. It's just.
I think this was before the castration.
Longing, deep longing. Yeah.
This makes me think of Hot Priest from Fleabag.
Oh,
which is always a nice thing to think about.
Be like, fuck it, let's go for it.
Right.
I have a culture recommendation, which is
Sarah,
I haven't fully gotten into, but speaking of Hot Priest, is that do you know that Andrew Scott, the actor
Ripley?
that can do no wrong, as my dad says, he's good in everything.
It's true.
Andrew Scott, there's this app, I'm going to find it, that's Sexy Stories.
Oh,
do you know what I'm talking about?
One of my friends is really into this. She's written a story for them.
Romper wrote
about it.
What are they called? We're going to find it.
It starts with
I think it's called Quinn.
Quinn.
There we go.
Yes.
Quinn.
And so Quinn has started doing celebrities reading these stories, and there's an Andrew Scott one.
Oh my
God.
God.
I just listened to the clips that they put on Instagram. I mean, it's literally 10 seconds and there's nothing. There's no content in it, because they're not trying to get anything away. And it's I thought I was going to die. It was it's literally the lines he reads are Moira, come here, come closer, or something. And he's like, and he's like, Moira. It's I was I'm gonna orgasm from a place in my body that I didn't know was there.
Yeah,
your ears.
So exactly, out the ears to smoke before he even gets to the sex.
I think this may finally convince me to listen to it.
Right.
I know. So I think I'm considering getting a membership. I'm what would that be? I would pay $50 to hear that story.
Can you do the thing? You can do what everyone did for the Olympics. Get it for there you go. Yeah. Would you be able to see what your dad had listened to? And that would be so horrible.
He loves Andrew Scott. What are you going to do? I
mean, who does? I'm not really interested in this Ripley show, but it's him. And so I'm well, I guess I have to watch it. Not. It's not an option.
Not an option. Mandatory.
Not an option. Well, and Eloise, I would love to get your recommendation for, and we'll share it in our Substack, but if we could link out to some of the children's books that you mentioned that talk about children's rights. Well, we'll get those from you. Okay, fabulous. Because I think that would be, I definitely want to order some, and I'm sure listeners will too. Thank you so much, Eloise. Come back again.
Yes, please.
This was so fun.
This was a delight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Mother of It All. And like my mom always said, what is a child? The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Nox Media with music from It's Electric. You can follow us on Substack at motherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox, chat and comment features, episode transcripts, and more. And on Instagram at The Mother of It All. We know you are profoundly busy, but if you like listening and can manage to follow, rate, or review us in a small moment between leaning in and having it all, it will help us reach a wider audience and meet our stretch goal of getting Michelle Obama on the pod. Thanks for your support. Now get out there and have a totally passable day.